Is anybody else weirdly excited for this launch? I'm not talking about the people that are getting a Switch 2, because obviously you'd be excited, you're buying a new console. I'm talking about those of us that are waiting for this thing to hopefully not sell as well and make a mark on the gaming industry. I don't think I've ever felt this much anticipation for a launch, specifically because I didn't want it to go well. And just seeing all of the back and forth online, and it's entirely possible that I am in my own circle and it's actually completely one-sided and everybody is just in favor of the Switch 2. I think that's more likely. But for where I'm sitting, it almost feels like that weird feeling prior to, I don't know, an election, where both sides are so confident that they're going to win, and all of the experts insist that one of the two sides is going to win, and it really just depends on which biased expert you follow. Kind of feels like that. Except, this is gaming and not the political world, so there's a lot less real-world risk here. But at the same time, gaming is such an integral part of gamers' life, so in some cases, some people might feel like this is more important than an election. And I'm gonna stop myself right there before I get too political. Now, I think it would be fun to make some predictions about how the Switch 2 may perform, and also what to expect following that. This actually comes off of multiple comments suggesting that I do some kind of prediction or discussion about what the future of Nintendo could look like following the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, whether it fails or it succeeds. And I think I like that idea, specifically on a day prior to the launch of the Switch 2, or it's even launched in some places around the world already, because this will be a good video to come back to in the future to see how wrong I was. A lot of these points may or may not be repeated from something that I said over the past 2 months, but I've made so many videos over the past 2 months that not only do I not know or remember which video I made certain comments in, but at this point, I can't possibly expect anybody to just come in and watch my video and know that I said something 2 months ago, even if they were new to the channel. So for example, during yesterday's video, I had a discussion about the rhetoric around the launch of the Switch 2 being very similar to the launch of the Wii U. I think I said it in that video later on, but I've also said it numerous times over the past couple of months. I do not expect the Switch 2 to fail like the Wii U did. At worst, I expect it to perform at 3DS numbers, which is about half the sales of the Switch. I also kind of feel like it'll only hit those numbers if there's a price drop, but I'm more 50-50 on that opinion. But let's talk about hypotheticals. So first things first, and this is not really in relation to the sales of the actual console, but I'm hearing whispers around my family, rumors that I might be getting a Switch 2 as a Father's Day gift. Now, I don't know for sure, but if that happens, I will not be using that Switch 2, and if anything, I might give it away to one of my viewers. I'm not sure how I'll do that. Maybe I'll just pick a random free member on Patreon or something. But if I do receive one, I'll either make a post about it or I'll mention it in a video and say just become a free member temporarily, and I'll just pick a random person and give it to, because I have no intention on using a Switch 2 at this point, even if it is a gift. Because can you imagine, after the last 2 months, if I showed up on day 2 after the Switch's launch saying that I have a Switch 2? At that point, even I would call myself a grifter. Luckily, I don't think anybody in my family actually watches this channel, so they won't know that I'm giving it away. So if I do indeed receive one, I should be in the clear to give it away without hurting anybody's feelings. Now, onto the actual juicy topic. I'll start off with what I think is the most extreme example. In my opinion, the most unlikely thing that could happen with the Switch 2 launch is that it becomes the best-selling console of all time. And I don't think too many people expect that. That would mean it would have to outsell the Switch and the PS2, and then all of the additional PS2s that would also randomly be found and sold after it surpasses 160 million. There is a scenario where it may become the best-selling console of all time, but I think that would be like an extreme case of like Nintendo is about to go broke, so they decide to sell them all for $100 and everybody just comes in and decides to buy it. So it's basically very unrealistic to assume that this will be the best-selling console of all time, which in turn means it is very unrealistic to match the Switch 1 numbers. I think people grossly underestimate just how much COVID helped console sales. Specifically the Nintendo Switch during that time frame when people could not get their hands on a PlayStation 5 nor an Xbox Series X, and they were stuck at home and they had no work and they just wanted to buy something to play and keep themselves busy, keep their kids busy. Not to mention the numbers made up by buying multiple Switch Lites for families. Like if they do a Switch 2 Lite that caps off at $250, then maybe that would get them somewhere, but I highly doubt it would be that cheap. That being said, I don't think that a Switch 2 not hitting 150 million is a failure. I just can't imagine a scenario where it reaches that number even with a price cut. The question is, where would it actually land? So I think realistically, if you're looking at somewhere around the PS4 numbers, and this is a higher end estimate, somewhere between 105 million and 130 million-ish. I think this thing can pass the Wii, but I don't think it passes it in its current state. I think it more realistically reaches those numbers with a desperate price drop or some other kind of damage control. Like, I don't know, saying that the games will cap off at $70 or $60 even. Or offering some types of bundles, some types of deals, just anything to kind of give people more incentive to buy in. I think it'll hit those numbers. Or rather, I should say, I think it can hit those numbers. Now, I think if Nintendo goes into this launch, sells everything just the exact same way as it is right now, I think it's very likely to match the Switch 1 numbers for year one, or get close to it. That 15 to 20 million range. The difference is with the Nintendo Switch 1, it was pretty evenly distributed every quarter during that first year, except there was a bigger boom obviously during the Christmas holiday season. I think since the holiday season is coming up quicker for this one because it's launching in June instead of in March, then it will reach that 15 to 20 million target a lot sooner than the Switch 1 did. Basically, I think that the Switch 2, as is, will match the Switch 1 year one numbers, and it will do it probably within 6 months. I think the launch numbers will undoubtedly be higher because it's coming off, number one, a successful console where people have already bought in, and number two, a post-COVID world where scalpers are a thing and bots are a thing, and it's just, there's so much more hype and FOMO generated around these launches than there used to be. And there was hype and FOMO generated around them before, but not as much as right now. Maybe that 15 million mark within 6 or 7 months might be overzealous on my end, but I think a vast majority of them sales will come in before that time, and then it's going to taper off throughout the end of the year. So it could match the Switch 1 year one numbers, but it'll be a lot less consistent. It'll be a lot more top heavy in this case. In my opinion, after that, there's going to be a drastic drop. It just kind of depends on how drastic of a drop we get. If it's like an absolute full stop slam on the brakes, then at that point, that's where I totally see Nintendo's damage control coming in. They'll pull a lever, all of a sudden prices get dropped and they make more sales. But if it's a drastic drop off and it's going at like half the rate of the Switch 1, then I don't think Nintendo will actually necessarily drop the price. I think they're okay with that. But I think Nintendo's angle of how they approach the console will change, and that's kind of what's more worrisome for me. I've been talking about the price drop a lot as if that's the solution that Nintendo has if the console doesn't sell well, and obviously I don't think it'll sell well because of the prices and all the other stuff. But there's another option that Nintendo could pull that kind of scares me, but at the same time, maybe it's for the best. I'm not sure. I've mentioned it a few times in comments, but I haven't spoken about it as much in the videos. There is an outcome here where Nintendo does not drop the price of the Switch 2. Even if it doesn't sell enough. But what they do instead is they start launching their games on both the Switch 1 and the Switch 2, effectively turning the Switch 2 into said Switch Pro. I don't know how much synergy there is between the consoles. I don't know how easy it is for them to make games on both of them, so I could be completely reaching here. But there is a likely scenario where the Switch 2 ends up selling maybe OLED numbers, perhaps a little bit more than that, but it's still deemed as a success for Nintendo because they were effectively able to continue on the Switch's lifespan, the Nintendo Switch 1 particularly. And then that way for Nintendo, they can keep going with that $300 cheap console that they launched in 2017, and they could effectively continue on that momentum for another generation. I think for a lot of people, that would be a worst case scenario, because if Nintendo is launching games on both consoles, they might not necessarily feel like Nintendo is putting in as much effort as they can into the new one, and there are some liberties that have to be taken, some limitations during game development. But for a lot of other people, that would be considered a great thing. They have their Switch 1, they can play every new game that comes out, they don't need to upgrade, and then if they would like to upgrade, they can go and grab a Switch 2 to play their games with better performance. And I could see a scenario where Nintendo continues that on for a while in order to increase software sales, and with that way, you get kind of a good favor with the fans who will slowly over time upgrade towards their Switch 2 until they eventually feel like they can just stop supporting the Switch 1 altogether. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what it feels like the PS5 and PS4 situation is here. Like, you could still play most games on a PS4 without upgrading to a PS5, but a lot of people will still upgrade to that PS5 for the better performance. And since Nintendo is clearly showing that they're trying to be a power console now, this is kind of their way of doing things, so maybe that's what Nintendo is considering as their backup plan. Their idea that we will never sell this thing at a loss. We will always make sure we make money on our Switch 2s. And we actually don't care if the Switch 2 isn't as successful because we'll still be selling our games from 2017 and onwards at full price. We'll still be selling our Switch 1s at the price they came out at launch, and people will still buy into them because by buying into it, you get the newest games, if they haven't bought into it already. And I actually think this might be one of the scariest outcomes, because it could very likely mean we are still playing and still buying ports and remasters 2 console generations after the Wii U at full price, and Nintendo will just make more and more money. Nintendo does not want the Switch 1's life to end. They don't want the Switch 1 momentum to end, but they have to do something. Launching a Switch 2 takes care of that something. They get to continue everything from the Switch 1 onto the Switch 2, make all of the money that they were making from the Switch 1 and continue making it onto the Switch 2. And for them, it's a win-win situation, because either everyone's going to be like, you know what, fine, I've had the Switch for X amount of years, I'm ready to upgrade, and they're going to buy into the new console, and if enough people buy in, they slowly support the Switch 1 less and less until everybody just feels obligated to upgrade. Or, on the opposite side of things, the Switch 2 does not perform as well as they anticipated, and their fallback is to just continue on with the Switch 1's life cycle. They have a user base of 150 million plus consoles out there right now, so they just start making cross-platform titles, and then you're gonna have, what, 150 million units plus another 50 million Switch 2 units? Minus whatever the failure rate is for all those consoles, you're still looking at a crap ton of Switches out there in the wild that can play the software. Whether it's a Switch 2 software or a Switch 1 software, it'll work on both. The cartridges already go into both consoles. Switch 2 edition titles can already be put into Switch 1 consoles. So again, I don't know if people would consider this a win or a loss. There are some people that would have the Switch 1, and in their minds, in a year from now, if Nintendo decided to let Mario Kart World work on the Switch 1 somehow, that would be great for them. Obviously, it'll have some kinds of limitations. But for a lot of people, as long as they can just play their 4-player split screen or their online multiplayer with their friends, that's enough. They don't need the full game. And then if they really want the full game, well, that's when they have to buy the Switch 2. And I think that's going to largely vary from person to person. And I don't know, I just feel like this is a more likely contingency plan on Nintendo's end than a price drop for the Switch 2. Or maybe there's a scenario where they have a $50 price drop and they already accounted for that. That could be their backup plan. If that $50 price tag doesn't work out, then maybe at that point, that's when they start doing the whole cross-generation release situation. I don't know. This is all speculation. It's all predictions on my end. Some people might call this fear-mongering, but I don't consider it fearful, because I think for a lot of people, they're okay with playing the Switch 2 games on the Switch 1. So if you're afraid and you feel like this is fear-mongering because this sounds like a negative scenario, I think that says more about you and what you want about the Switch 2. Now, you could argue this is me painting a negative picture about the way Nintendo does things, but I don't need to paint a negative picture about the way Nintendo does things because they already sold me that negative portrait. So it's not like I'm saying Nintendo is more evil. If anything, I'm saying this is how they could be nice to us if they fail. But I will say that I remember back in, 2022? Furukawa said that the Switch is still in the middle of its life cycle. This was roughly 5 years after the Switch had released, and I remember all of the reports early on in the Switch's life that they expected to be twice as long as the average console life cycle. And that's a big reason why I've spent the past few years prior to the reveal of the Switch 2 telling my closest friends that I don't expect a Switch 2 to come out until 2026 minimum. This was all during the past 3 or 4 years when everybody kept saying that the Switch 2 needs to come out right now. It needs to come out right now. It took until 2025. I was off by 6 months, but I was pretty close. But by 2022, if they still believe the Switch was in the middle of its life cycle, realistically speaking, they were in the final stages of being complete with the Switch 2 by then. And if you believe the rumors, the Switch 2 was actually done by then, and it was supposed to be launched as a Switch Pro, but they held off on it. But despite that, Furukawa still said that he expects that the Switch is in the middle of its life cycle. which means we can expect another 2 years of Switch 1 support. And maybe this is part of it. Maybe it's a launch of the Switch 2, see how that goes, move everything on, and slowly support the Switch 1 less and less. Or extend the Switch 1's life while telling people, hey, if you want something stronger, we have our stronger console for you to use. Give it 1 or 2 exclusive games to cater to people, while making a whole line of games that have Switch 2 edition on them. That way you can continue to release games on both the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 throughout the Switch 2's life cycle, and then have the president of Nintendo of America tell people that if you can't afford the Switch 2, go and buy the cheaper one. We're still going to sell games on that at full price, even if they are over 7 years old. So yeah, my final prediction, I guess I would say for the Switch 2 is that it has a very good first year, probably matching the Switch 1, maybe plus or minus a little bit, and then it starts to taper off. Depending on how Nintendo reacts to that, either it's gonna hit, I don't know, the 50 million mark, and that would be its lifetime sales numbers, or if Nintendo really starts to push it and really wants people to buy in, they start offering bundles, they start offering sales and whatever, it'll probably double that number. Only time will tell, however. I'm just somebody making predictions, I don't know. And actually, somebody asked me what would I do if I was wrong. Somebody even asked me if I would come back and make an apology video for being wrong, which I thought was very foolish of them to ask. What exactly am I apologizing for? For predicting whether a console will succeed or won't succeed? Do channels regularly apologize to their viewers for guessing what games might come out or what might sell well or what might not sell well? Do reviewers apologize to buyers because they bought a game and it ended up being crappy? I'm just confused here because Nintendo selling well does not mean I was wrong about anything. I'm making a guess. I'm making a lot of guesses, many of which are based off of the way Nintendo has been acting. And if it sells well, that doesn't mean anything that I've said is not true. Nintendo is being very anti-customer. They're being very scummy. If they sell well, that doesn't change that. Apple sells phenomenally every year, and they're still a horrible company, especially for their consumers. So no, if the Switch 2 is a resounding success, I will not be apologizing to anybody. Actually, let me take that back. Maybe I will apologize to one specific type of people. If you are somebody who's young and you're hearing me speak and you're like, yeah, this guy's onto something, I'm not gonna buy the Switch 2, even though I really want it, but I'm gonna join his boycott because we're gonna push back against Nintendo, then I will tell you this specifically. We are in a very uphill battle. We are very likely not going to win on this pushback. I think we will, but the most realistic outcome is that Nintendo is going to win because the corporations always win and people don't vote with their wallets. For me, a loss is still a win because I feel like my integrity has won. I feel like not giving into Nintendo and providing them with more money will be the winning factor here, unless of course they change. So if you're somebody that's bought into the stuff that I'm saying, you might not be a winner here. You might miss out on playing with your friends. You might miss out on childhood experiences that helped shape my childhood. And even if you're not a child, let's say you're in your late teens, your early 20s, you might miss out on a lot of fun because you're thinking this dude on YouTube sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And I realize this now more than I did a couple months ago because my channel is growing a lot. I think I'm having a lot of influence on some people online. I mean, there's 20,000 people that are listening to my videos on the regular. Not to mention some of my videos go a lot more and some of them obviously go a lot less. So I just do want to clarify, and it was my understanding that this was already clear, but I guess with my channel growing, I can't keep track of these things. Despite how confident I may sound, despite the fact that I'm using history to make my predictions, despite the fact that I'm looking into a lot of things around the industry and thinking that this is a battle that's worth it, for me, this might not be a battle that's worth fighting for you. It might not necessarily be worth you boycotting Nintendo if your entire friend circle, familial circle is already buying into this thing. And I hope that is clear for everybody. As confident as I think that I am, there's a very good chance that we are wrong here and Nintendo just sells phenomenally well. And I don't know, worst case scenario pops in and they're raising the prices and the Switch 2 is more expensive next year and you should have never listened to Nintendo and just bought it on year one. That is always a possibility. Things happen. But you have to understand the risks when you're going up against a corporation. You have to understand the risks when you're going into a protest or a boycott. So I hope you keep that in mind, because the last thing I would want for anybody is to miss out on a fun social experience because of something that I had said, not without understanding the risks at least. If you were to miss out on it because you believe in the cause, then by all means miss out on these social experiences if you believe in it. but just understand that there is a good chance we're not gonna get a pushback here. I'm just very optimistic that we will. I hope that's clear, and I think I've actually said enough. Thank you so much for listening. I will catch you guys on the next one. There's going to be a lot more videos coming out because the launch is coming up. I'm assuming I will have a lot to talk about even if I don't get this console.